My father stood up at my wedding reception, tapped his glass, and told 60 guests that I had chosen to throw my life away on a man with grease under his fingernails, and that as of that evening, I was no longer a beneficiary of the Porter family trust. Then he looked at Owen, my husband of approximately 4 hours, and said, "No offense, son. You seem like a decent man, but my daughter was raised for a certain kind of life, and I won't fund a different one. Welcome to her Untold Nights. If you're new here, go ahead and subscribe and turn on the bell." Owen looked at my father for a long, calm moment. Then he said, very quietly, 4 words: "I understand. Thank you." My father seemed briefly wrong-footed by the lack of argument. He sat down. The room made the particular uncomfortable noise of 60 people pretending they hadn't just witnessed something they absolutely had. I picked up my champagne glass. I looked at my husband. Owen was already looking at me, and his expression was not devastated or angry or humiliated. His expression was the one I had learned in 2 years of loving him. Meant he was thinking carefully about something and had already arrived at a conclusion. He said, very quietly, just to me, "Ready to go build something?" I said, "I've been ready my whole life. My name is Fontaine Porter, or rather Fontaine Porter Webb. And what we built in the 6 months after my father's announcement is the reason that when my parents walked into the grand opening of his most important resort and saw my husband standing at the center of it, my father's face did something I had never once seen it do in 31 years. It went pale. My father, Harrison Porter, had built his fortune in hospitality and luxury real estate hotels, resorts, mixed-use developments that bore his name on their facades and his particular vision in every detail. He was a man who understood better than almost anyone how to create a space that made people feel they had arrived somewhere worth being. He was also a man who applied that same exacting curatorial eye to his family, which meant that for 31 years I had been managed, curated, and displayed in the same way he managed, curated, and displayed his properties. My mother, Celeste, was his most polished acquisition. She had grown up in old Southern money and brought to their marriage a particular kind of grace that my father respected in the way he respected any asset that appreciated in social value over time. She was not cruel. She was not warm. She was precisely calibrated, and she had raised me in her own image. Composed, elegant, presentable, the kind of woman who was invited to things rather than the kind who built them. The word my father used for me, decorative, was not new that night at my wedding. He had used it privately, and sometimes not so privately, for years. It was meant, I had always understood, as a compliment. Beautiful things had value. Display was a function. Being ornamental in the right rooms was a skill. I had simply, somewhere in my mid-20s, stopped receiving it as a compliment and started hearing it as exactly what it was, a ceiling, dressed up as praise. What my family didn't know, what I had never found the right way to tell them because they had never asked, was that I had spent the previous 4 years building something entirely outside the Porter family's visibility. I had a degree in design that my parents had funded as a kind of acceptable hobby credential, the kind of thing a woman of my background could study without anyone feeling it needed to be taken seriously. What I had done with it was not decorative. I had spent 3 years working, mostly unpaid and mostly invisible to my family, with a small but respected sustainable architecture firm in Austin, learning the actual practice of design, from the ground up material sourcing, structural collaboration, the unglamorous administrative reality of bringing a building from concept to completion. I had met Owen Webb at a construction site. He was 36 to my 29, wearing a hard hat and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up. reviewing structural drawings with an intensity I recognized immediately as the particular focus of someone who genuinely cares whether a building stands correctly. He was not the kind of man my family would have placed in any room I was supposed to occupy. He was also the most interesting person I had spoken to in years. Owen was, I want to be specific about this, because the specificity matters, the lead structural engineer and co-founder of Webb Hartley Construction and Design, a firm with a 15-year history of building exactly the kind of high-end, architecturally significant projects that my father's industry depended on. The firm was not flashy. Owen was not flashy. He drove a truck with 140,000 miles on it, and he almost always had some evidence of actual construction work on his hands because he visited every one of his project sites regularly and believed that an engineer who never touched the work couldn't fully understand it. We dated for 2 years before he proposed, 2 years in which I told my parents about him gradually, carefully, optimistically. Each conversation met with the particular polite dismissal that well-bred people deploy when they have decided something is beneath their attention. My father asked once what Owen's firm's annual revenue was, received the answer, and said, "That's a very respectable small business, Fontaine." Webb Hartley was not a small business. It had completed over 300 projects across 12 states, had won 4 national design awards, and was, within the specific world of high-end construction and hospitality development, one of the most sought-after firms in the country. My father simply did not know that, because he had decided Owen was beneath investigation before he had done any investigating. I did not correct him. I had learned by then that correcting my father before he had committed to a position simply caused him to entrench it. I thought, with some naivety in retrospect, that he would eventually meet Owen properly and understand. He did not meet Owen properly. He met him for 45 minutes at an awkward dinner, spent most of it discussing Harrison Porter's own resort projects, and left having referred to Owen twice as Fontaine's friend. Owen had said, on the drive home, with the dry humor that I loved, "I think he genuinely doesn't know my name." We got married on a Saturday in October. It was a small wedding by Porter family standards, 80 people. A venue outside Austin that Owen had actually helped design 3 years earlier, which I found quietly perfect. My parents came. My father stood up at the reception and did what I have already told you he did. And Owen said 4 quiet words, and we left. Let me take you fully into the wedding night, because the cold open only gave you the headline. After Owen's 4 words, "I understand, thank you," and after my father sat down, the reception continued with the specific brittle cheerfulness of an event that has survived a disruption no one is going to acknowledge. My mother found me near the dessert table and said, very quietly, "Your father means well, Fontaine. He just wants the best for you." I said, "I know, Mom," which was not agreement. It was just the response that ended the conversation fastest. Owen and I left at 9:30, earlier than planned. In the car, I said, "I'm sorry about my father." Owen said, "Don't be. He said what he thinks. I respect that more than people who say one thing and think another." I said, "He called you a man with grease under his fingernails." Owen looked at his hands on the steering wheel. He said, "He's not wrong." And then, after a moment, "Those are honest hands, Fontaine. I've never been ashamed of them." That was perhaps the moment I understood most clearly that I had married exactly the right person. The 6 months that followed were, from the outside, quiet. Owen and I settled into our life in Austin. I continued my work with the architecture firm, now with more formal standing, and a project lead role that I had earned in the previous year and that my parents had never known about. Owen continued building Webb Hartley's pipeline of projects, which included, at that point, 17 active contracts across 8 states, including one very large, very significant contract that neither of us was yet thinking about in the specific way we would come to think about it. My parents, meanwhile, were doing something I found out about through a back channel a college friend who ran in some of the same Austin social circles as my father's business contacts. My father had been making calls. Not dramatic calls, not anything that could be called direct interference, but the kind of careful social calibration that wealthy people do when they want to manage a narrative, mentioning in the right conversations that Fontaine had made an unfortunate choice, that the marriage was unlikely to last, that Owen Webb was a decent enough man, but not the kind of person you'd want your daughter building her future on. The goal, as far as I could understand it, was to keep the social pressure on to make it known that the Porter family considered the marriage an embarrassment, in the hope that I would eventually feel the cost of that embarrassment enough to reconsider. What my father did not understand was that Owen Webb did not care about social pressure from Harrison Porter. Owen had been building things for 15 years without anyone's approval, and he had no intention of starting to need it now. That was peak 1, the wedding, and the quiet social campaign that followed. Peak 2 came when I learned that my father's calls had extended beyond social narrative management into something more direct. One of Webb Hartley's clients, a hotel group based in Nashville that had worked with the firm on 2 previous projects, reached out to Owen with a slightly awkward inquiry. Their board had received a call from someone in my father's network suggesting, gently, that Webb Hartley's leadership was currently involved in a complicated family situation that might affect the firm's stability and focus. The Nashville group wanted to know if everything was all right. Owen called me after that conversation. He was not angry. Owen expressed almost everything through a kind of calm precision that made him difficult to rattle, but he was very clear. He said, "Your father is reaching into my professional relationships, Fontaine. I need you to know that." I said, "Owen, I'm so sorry." He said, "Don't apologize. Just know." I knew. And I felt for the first time since the wedding something colder and more deliberate than hurt. My father had not just made a speech at my wedding. He was actively attempting to destabilize my husband's livelihood because my husband had not been adequately deterred by the speech. That was a different category of action. I did not confront my father about it. I made a note of it. I filed it in the same internal place where I had been filing my father's behavior for 31 years, not for revenge, but for clarity, for the complete, accurate picture of who he was and what he was willing to do. Peak 3 came 10 weeks after the wedding, on a Tuesday morning, when Owen came home from a project site earlier than expected and set his laptop on the kitchen table and said, "Fontaine, I need to show you something." He turned the laptop toward me. On the screen was a project file, Webb Hartley's internal project management system, a list of active contracts. He pointed to one near the top, a hospitality project, a resort development in coastal South Carolina. Grand opening planned for the following spring. I looked at the project name. I looked at Owen. I said, "Is that my father's resort?" Owen said, "Webb Hartley won the structural contract 14 months ago. 8 months before you and I got engaged. We've been the structural engineering firm on your father's flagship resort development for over a year." I sat with that for a long moment. My father's most important project. The resort he had been describing, in interviews and family conversations alike, as the defining achievement of his career. The one he was planning a grand opening for in the spring, with every important name in hospitality development invited. Owen's firm had built it. My father, who did not know Owen's name at our wedding dinner, who had spent 6 months attempting to quietly undermine Owen's professional reputation, had been standing on work that Owen's hands and Owen's firm had made possible. I said, very quietly, does he know? Owen said, Harrison Porter has never asked who his structural engineer is. His project manager at Porter Developments handled the contracting. Your father deals with the vision. He leaves the building to other people. I thought about that, about a man who built his identity around creating spaces, who had spent his career taking credit for developments he never physically touched, who had looked at my husband's honest, work-worn hands and seen something lesser. I said, are you going to the grand opening? Owen said, Webb Hartley was invited as a contractor. It would be professionally appropriate for me to attend. I said, then I'm coming with you. Owen looked at me for a moment. He said, Fontaine, we don't need this to be a moment. I said, I know, but I think it's going to be one whether we plan for it or not. And I'd rather be there, standing beside you, than not. In the weeks between that Tuesday morning conversation and the resort grand opening, I made several decisions. The first was that I was going to tell my mother before the event. Not my father. My father would have used the information to find a way to restructure the evening, to manage the revelation before it could land naturally, to find some way to absorb it without having to fully experience it. My mother was different. My mother, underneath the calibration and the composure, had a capacity for genuine reckoning that my father lacked. And I thought she deserved the chance to walk into that room knowing what she was walking into. I called her on a Wednesday evening. I told her, simply, that Owen's firm was the structural engineering contractor on my father's resort. I told her this was not something we had arranged or planned. The contract predated our engagement by 8 months. I told her Owen had been invited as a contractor and that I would be attending with him. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Fontaine, does your father know? I said, not yet. I thought you should know first. Another silence. Then, what are you planning to do? I said, nothing dramatic. Mom, I'm going to stand beside my husband at a professional event where his firm's work is being celebrated. That's all. She said, your father is going to be. I said, I know. That's between him and whatever he decides to do with the information. I'm not coming to embarrass him. I'm coming because Owen was invited and I am Owen's wife. My mother said, after a long pause, I'll talk to him before the event. I said, you don't have to do that, Mom, she said. I know I don't have to. I want to. That was the first moment since the wedding that I felt something genuinely warm toward my mother, not the performed warmth of a dutiful daughter, but actual warmth for a woman who, in her own limited and careful way, was trying. The second decision I made was about what I had been building myself. In the 6 months since the wedding, working with my architecture firm and increasingly in partnership with Webb Hartley on the design side of several projects, I had developed something that had started as a side project and had grown into what I could now legitimately call a small practice of sustainable interiors and design consultancy. 3 clients. 1 completed project that had been written up in a regional design publication the previous month. It was not empire. It was a beginning. But it was mine, built with my own competence, in an industry my family had decided I was decorative within. I had not told my parents about it. Not out of secrecy, out of the specific, learned caution of a woman who had spent her life having her achievements minimized before they were fully formed. I had wanted it to be real, verifiable, documented, before I offered it to the people who had always decided in advance that I was capable of nothing more than looking good in the right rooms. I added it to my professional profile the week before the grand opening. A small update, nothing announced. Just a fact, published quietly, that said, Fontaine Porter Webb, design consultant and principal, Webb Porter Design, in partnership with Webb Hartley Construction. Owen had looked at the published profile and said, with his particular quiet smile, Webb Porter, you put my name first. I said, alphabetical order. He said, sure it is. The grand opening was on a Friday evening in late April. The resort was everything my father had promised in his interviews, genuinely beautiful. The kind of coastal property that made you understand why someone had spent years bringing it into existence. Walking through it for the first time that evening, I felt something I hadn't expected. A complicated pride. My father had imagined this. Owen had helped build it. I was the intersection between them that neither of them had known to look for. We arrived at 7. Owen in a well-fitted suit, not a designer suit, a well-made one. The kind of suit that says this is not the most important thing I do today, but I respect the occasion. And me in a dress I had designed with a friend, specifically for this evening, in the specific shade of blue that my father had once said was my best color. In the specific year he had still believed I was something worth displaying. I wore it because it was a beautiful dress. Also, because I have never fully outgrown the pleasure of making a point with perfect composure. The moment my parents saw us, I knew my mother had not told my father. I say that not in blame. I think she had tried and had not found the right words, or had found them too late, or had simply known that no amount of preparation would have made Harrison Porter ready for this specific moment. Some reckonings cannot be softened by advance notice. They simply have to land. My father was standing near the entrance of the main reception hall, glass in hand, the posture of a man in the room he has created and knows it expansive, proprietary, welcoming in the way that powerful people are welcoming when they are at the center of their own domain. He saw me first. His expression did the complicated thing it always did when he saw me registering pleasure at the appearance, and then the particular tightening that came when he remembered the circumstance. Then he followed my gaze to the man beside me, and his expression did something I had genuinely never seen in 31 years. It stopped. Not went pale exactly, though that happened too, a moment later. It simply stopped processing for a full second, the way a face stops when the brain is receiving information that doesn't yet have a category. Owen Webb, whom Harrison Porter had dismissed at a dinner table as Fontaine's friend and had spent 6 months quietly attempting to undermine, was standing in the lobby of Harrison Porter's Flagship resort in a well-fitted suit, being greeted by the resort's project manager with the specific warmth you reserve for the people whose work made the building possible. I watched my father understand it. Not quickly, it moved across his face in layers, the way understanding moves when it is unwelcome. The project manager was saying something to Owen about the structural details of the East Wing. Owen was responding with the ease of a man discussing his own work. My father looked at his project manager. He looked at Owen. He looked at me. My mother beside him had gone very still. I walked toward them. Owen beside me, unhurried, the same as he always was, not performing anything, not arriving at this moment with any visible awareness of its significance, simply present and professional and himself. I said, Dad, Mom, I'm glad you could be here. My father said, with the specific, careful tone of a man assembling himself in real time, Fontaine. I didn't know you be. Owen extended his hand. Harrison. Owen Webb. Webb Hartley handled the structural engineering on this project. Congratulations on what you've built here. Your team had a clear vision and it made our job easier than it usually is. My father shook Owen's hand. He said with a composure I genuinely respected even in that moment, Webb Hartley, Of course. Your team's work on the East Wing was exceptional. I should have made the connection. Owen said, simply, no reason you would have. You were focused on the vision. That's as it should be. There was a moment, just a moment, perhaps 5 seconds, where Harrison Porter looked at my husband with an expression I had never seen directed at Owen before. Not the dismissal of the wedding dinner. Not the competitive suspicion of a man whose social maneuvering had just been quietly exposed. Something more honest than either of those things. Something that looked, if I am being precise, like the beginning of actual seeing. My father said to Owen, I'd like to talk more tonight if you have time. Owen said, of course. My mother took my arm as we moved into the reception, and she said, so quietly only I could hear, you wore the blue. I said, I wear what I like, Mom. She said, I know. A pause. I've been thinking about that, actually, about what I've taught you to wear. In every sense, it was, from my mother, as close to an apology as I had ever received. Not the words of an apology. My mother was not built for direct apology. And I had made my peace with that, but the acknowledgement of a woman who had, in her own careful way, begun to look at something she had always looked past. Owen and my father talked for almost an hour that evening. I was present for parts of it and absent for others. There were people at that event I knew professionally. Conversations I was genuinely glad to have. A regional design editor I had met through the firm who was interested in doing a profile of Webb Porter design. I let Owen and my father have whatever they were going to have without monitoring it. Owen told me on the drive home that my father had asked him at some point in the conversation whether he had known, when he met me, who my family was. Owen had said yes. My father had said, and you pursued her anyway. Owen had said, I pursued her because she was the most interesting person on that job site. Her family seemed beside the point. My father had been quiet for a moment. Then he had said, I think I may have made some errors in my assessment of the situation. Owen had said, with his characteristic precision, I think you probably have. But we're here now. My father called me the following Monday. Not to reverse the trust fund decision, he did not do that. And I want to be honest that he hasn't, and that I do not want him to, because what I have built does not depend on it. He called to say that he would like to have dinner, the four of us, and to start over, as he put it, with a cleaner understanding. We had that dinner. It was uncomfortable and careful and real in the way that dinners are when people are genuinely trying. My father asked Owen about Webb Hartley's pipeline. He asked me about Webb Porter design. He listened, actually listened, not performed listening in a way I had rarely seen him do with anyone who wasn't telling him something he already wanted to hear. We are still rebuilding. The trust fund remains unchanged. I have not asked about it and will not. The word decorative has not been used again in my presence, and I choose to believe that is not coincidence. If someone has ever looked at you and seen only what you came from, only the surface, only the label, only the inheritance or the lack of it, I want to say something to you directly. Your worth is something you build, not something you inherit, not something granted by the approval of people who were supposed to know you and chose instead to categorize you. The hands that built it grease under the nails or not are the proof. The work is the proof. The quiet, unglamorous, real accumulation of what you actually made with what you actually had. I spent 31 years being managed like a property, displayed, curated, positioned for maximum effect in the rooms my father decided mattered. I was good at it. That is the complicated truth I want to sit with. For a moment, I was good at being decorative. in the way that intelligent people become good at whatever they are given to do, even when it is far below what they are capable of. What changed was not one dramatic moment. It was Owen saying, ready to go build something, and me saying yes, and then actually building it quietly, practically, one project and one client and one true thing at a time, in an industry my father had decided I was incapable of contributing to in any meaningful way. Watch how people treat you when they think you have nothing. That is the truest information you will ever receive about who they are. My father at my wedding believed he was withdrawing something I needed. What he actually did was remove the last reason I had to stay small. I am grateful for that. I mean it genuinely. Not every gift arrives wrapped. Real love never asks you to make yourself smaller. Owen Webb, who has never once in 2 years suggested that I shrink or simplify or strategically diminish what I am capable of, is the clearest evidence I have that I married exactly the right person. He gives me room to stand at full height. That turns out to be the most extraordinary thing one person can do for another. Thank you for spending this time with me. If Fontaine's story resonated with you, if someone has ever tried to define your ceiling and you found a way to build past it, I'd love to hear about it in the comments.